Well, we've certainly gotten an earful this morning, and now to help us understand what it all means, we turn to our all-star panel, Peggy Noonan of the Wall Street Journal, Bob Woodward, who writes for the Post, Bill Kristol, columnist for the Weekly Standard, and former White House Chief of Staff turned contributor to CBS News, Bill Daley. All of them here at the table today. Bill, you actually have some news, I understand, because you've learned that the Republicans are going to, present an alternative to Obamacare.
Yeah, I mean, Obamacare is, I think, really a disaster and not getting better. But the best talking point Democrats have had is, well, what would you do? Just go back to the status quo ante, which wasn't so great. People losing health insurance, at least allegedly, if they had pre-existing conditions, poor people having trouble getting health insurance. So I think I'm not supposed to be revealing this, but since you asked me, I guess I just have to say it. No, senior Republican senators tomorrow are going to lay out the outlines of legislation, which I think will become real legislation. There would be a conservative reform alternative to Obamacare. It would deal with the pre-existing condition problem. It would have tax credits for the poor. It would get rid of all the ridiculous bureaucracy, regulation, limitations of Obamacare. And I think this will be Senator Coburn of Oklahoma, who's retiring, very well respected. Senator Hatch, who is the ranking Republican on the Finance Committee, will become chairman of Senate Finance next year if Republicans win the Senate. And Senator Burr, who's senior on the Health Committee. So this is a serious piece of legislation. It could get, I think, pretty across-the-board support from Republican senators. There are some tweaks in it that there'll be debates among Republicans and conservatives about how generous to be with the subsidies and with the tax credits and so forth. But I think it really will make it harder for the president and for Democrats to say the Republicans have no alternative.
Will there be any chance that that could pass?
If Republicans win the Senate in November, I think in 2015 you could imagine a Republican Senate and a Republican House passing this. Republican House might even pass it this year. And again, then it's up to the president whether he wants to abandon Obamacare and sign on to a sensible health care reform.
Peggy, what do you think about Ted Cruz today? Does he still enjoy the support that he had back when he led Republicans to shut down the government?
Oh, I think he's fighting to regain his footing a little bit. I don't think there are too many people who say that was a huge success, what happened last time with the government shutdown. And we have laughter from a Democrat now because huge success is not quite the way he'd put it either. But could I note, Bill, if the Republicans who are going to unveil their plan tomorrow, if that plan is simple and marked by clarity, and is not 2,000 pages, and is not too complicated for a normal human to get it, that might gain some purchase and go someplace. But to your question, Ted Cruz is trying to come back, I think.
Bill Daley, what about it? Do you think there's any chance that Republicans can come up with something to replace
well,
the so-called
it's good
Obamacare?
to hear that they finally have decided that this is an important issue that they ought to put some principles out on. The president, I think, has been very clear for the last couple of years. Well, I'm willing to talk. I'm willing to listen. Let's try to make this better if you don't think it's perfect, which I don't think he'd probably be the first to say it's not perfect. It is working better. Now, those who have been praying for the collapse of reform in health care, the thought that they may now be willing to engage is good, obviously, for the system.
What do you think is going to happen this next year, Bob? Much of anything?
Well, if
Some
you look
people
at
say
it,
nothing.
I mean, everything in all of this, it looks like more gridlock and deadlock. It looks like people aren't agreeing, and there are spending and taxing issues which could be negotiated if these people would sit down that really could make a difference for Obama and the Republicans. And you listen to what Obama was saying to the New Yorkers, David Remnick, and what's in the papers this morning. It sounds like everyone is going into we're not going to do anything mode, and that's unfortunate.
Well, we'll see, and we're going to talk to all of you in part 2 of our broadcast, but we'll stop right now. We have a lot more coming up. We'll see you in part 2 here. And welcome back to Face the Nation, page 2. Peggy Noonan of the Wall Street Journal's here. Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard and former White House Chief of Staff, now a contributor to CBS, Bill Daley. Well, let's get back and talk about what to expect from the President's State of the Union. I was just saying as we left, Bob, it looks like not much. He's not going to make any big promises this time.
Small ball, or is Bill Daley was saying no ball. And there are governing issues, and if you look at this, and I've spent some time looking at the Democrats, Obama has some good ideas, the Republicans have some good ideas, and they should sit down and say, I mean, I think one of the indicators here is over the summer, Obama had dinner with a bunch of CEOs from the high-tech world, and one of them asked the right question, said, what are you worried about most? And Obama said unemployment. Second, he said climate change. Third, he said Pakistan. Now, number one issue, unemployment. How do you do? There are things the government can do that both parties have ideas, and you, on the back of an envelope, Bill Daley could work out something that would be saleable to both sides.
Well, what I meant by the no ball is it doesn't look like Congress can play any ball game together. And that, I think, the president, after a very difficult year with very little done, and this partisanship and the fight within the Republican Party that seems to be playing out continually, and will, for in my opinion, at least through 16, that the odds of something happening there are pretty slim. I think what the president's going to do, and what I think is a smart move, is to try to figure out how to use the government for each of those issues in a way that you don't have to go to legislation and get mirrored in this craziness that's been going on the Hill for too long.
But you know, Bill, isn't he going to have to reach out more to the Hill? I mean, it seemed to me that the Obama White House had some of the worst relations that I can recall since I've been in Washington with the Hill. There was at one point where nobody even knew who his congressional liaison was. They couldn't identify him in a lineup. Well, I mean, really, I mean, and those
you've
things
got to want,
I got from Democrats,
you've got to
not
want
from Republicans.
people to reach out to you. And there has been a sense by a lot of people on the Hill, we just don't want to engage this White House. When I was there in 11, we had a lot of engagement. It was very difficult. I think there was a sense that there was a chance with divided government to get somewhere, as you saw.
You're not saying there are Democrats on Capitol Hill who say, I don't want to engage with the White House.
No, I'm saying there's a Republican, strong piece of the Republican Party up there who has been consistent since they got control of the House. And many people, like Ted Cruz, to be frank with you, who was pretty clear, even though he's rewriting history today with you, on what happened with the shutdown, that just don't want to engage this president. And if there is a person who is reaching out more than any president I've seen in a long time, it's been President Obama, who has done that. But you've got to want someone to reach out to you to respond to. And I've just not seen that in the last couple of years.
Do you agree with that, Bill?
Well, I think if Bill were still there in the White House as chief of staff, maybe that would be true. But I've talked to a fair number of Democrats who haven't heard a lot from this president. Last I looked, they've controlled the Senate for all 5 years of the Obama presidency, and one doesn't have the sense that the president has got a lot of legislation going through that body either. So, no, I don't think he's been an effective leader. And I'm curious in the State of the Union, he is the president. He's commander-in-chief. That's the one thing where you don't need Congress as much. What is he going to defend this deal with Iran, where the Iranian leaders are chortling that it's a surrender by the U.S. and where they're making clear they're not going to dismantle everything? What's he going to say about Afghanistan? Bob Gates, his Secretary of Defense, who served him very ably, said, what did he say, that President Obama just wants to get out. Is he going to explain what his strategy?
He doesn't believe in his own strategy,
having ordered a surge, which I supported at the time. Is he going to say something serious about Afghanistan? And you just said that, I didn't know this, that he said Pakistan was his number 3 thing that keeps him up at night. What happens in Afghanistan affects what happens in Pakistan. So I think the foreign policy part of this speech will be interesting.
Let me just ask you about one thing you wrote this week, and you said that Republicans ought not to expect a debt ceiling bonanza. In other words, go ahead, vote, let the debt ceiling be raised, and make your fight on something else.
Yeah, vote against it if they want, but don't fight on the debt ceiling. As my advice to my friends in the sort of conservative activist Tea Party wing of the party, my advice to the Republican leadership is don't push immigration reform, which I think totally splits the Republican Party and forces a negotiation with a bad bill coming out of the Senate. So my view is no amnesty on immigration, no default on debt ceiling, and a happy year for Republicans.
And Peggy, I was very taken by the piece you wrote in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, which you said basically people will sort of snooze through the President's State of the Union message because they've stopped listening to him.
I think so. I think people have gotten to the point where at the beginning of the 6th year of the Obama administration, people are managing to restrain their excitement when the president speaks in a big speech or not. He spoke the other day on NSA. Pew Research went out to talk to 1,500 people. half of the people didn't know he'd said a thing. 1 in 10 paid attention to it. They didn't like what he said. That's what's going on. He is overexposed, as all presidents are by this point, but he more than others in the past. He also has hanging over him right now not only his inability to be a swaying force with the Congress of the United States, he also has over him the fact that Obamacare this year came out. It's no longer a hazy promise, it is a reality, and it is a reality that has caused more upset than good. It has lost more people coverage than given them. It's also become obvious that truths were not told in the selling of this darn thing. So when you put together, oh my God, the central meaning of his presidency was put forward somewhat fraudulently, plus he's always in our face, that will equal, I don't think I'm going to watch that speech. I'm sorry. I know that's a harsh thing to say, but I think that's what's going on.
But the management experts would say the way you have to deal with this, and Obama said in these recent interviews, he understands the power of the presidency. He realizes he can do things. And the answer is to pick one thing, to focus and act aggressively on that one thing. And you look at all of the, like the NSA speech, it's kind of, well, I like the NSA, but I'm worried about them. He wants to have lots of these things both ways, and he's got to come out and say, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to fix. He has good ideas. One thing, it's expensive, spend money on infrastructure, schools, bridges, roads, and you look at the economic impact of that, and it could be favorable. People could get jobs. There are a lot of Republican senators, Bill, who are willing to go along with that for an exchange.
They would have been
something
5 years ago.
On corporate taxes. So there's a deal to be made, and in fact, what the president should do, I mean, Bill Daley knows this, turn it over to Vice President Biden and tell him to go down and make a deal, as Biden has done time and time again.
Well, you know, on that, Mike Lee, who's one of the most conservative Republican senators, has actually given a speech laying out a proposal to reform the highway, the transportation bill, which is a notorious pork-laden thing, send the money back to the states, but not cut it, and let's be serious about fixing infrastructure. So I agree, if the president takes Bill Daley's advice, which I don't think he will, and calls Mike Lee in and says, well, can we reform the highway bill at the same time that we actually spend some money on infrastructure, there would be Republicans willing to work for him.
I think the president, quite frankly, I mean, this all sounds great at this table, but when you get to the reality on the Hill and the inability and the lack of desire by lots of people who have come to the office of the Senate or the House with the express purpose of, we're going to stop this president and we're going to stop him from being successful, that I think it's going to be very, very difficult to do other than what he can do on his own, at least in this year too, because you're now suddenly in the, everyone's focused on the Hill on running for president or running for re-election, and it's just the climate in this town, and all due respect to those who keep saying it's going to get better. We've seen this now, and right now my advice to the president is do doubles and triples. Don't go for home runs, and when you go near the Hill, you better make sure you've got a unified plan, both with Republicans, but it all sounds good, Bill, but the president's tried much of this, even when I was there 2 years ago on infrastructure, and we had a reasonable plan. Nobody go near it.
It's always hard. I mean, I hate to sound like an old guy, but it's always hard. It was pretty hard for Lyndon Johnson. Those Southern Democrats, they weren't too much about desegregation.
All due respect to Lyndon Johnson, if a president tried to do what Lyndon Johnson did, he'd probably be, if not impeached, indicted.
Well, he got something done. He got two very important things.
But he didn't have the people sitting at the table like we're sitting today, analyzing exactly what he did and how he did it, and if they did.
But you
we were doing that. Sure,
of course
we were.
I
mean, you and I were kids,
Bill
but the
Clinton,
grown-ups were at
the
this
last
stage talking about it.
Bill, you remember this as you served in his cabinet. Bill Clinton was the last Democrat to be reelected. He capitalized on his reelection. He negotiated with a Republican Congress that was full of people who were regarded as lunatic wackos who were elected running against Clinton, Newt Gingrich, and they cut a very useful deal in 1997, which led to budget surpluses. That was Clinton. That wasn't
and
so
the other
I
thing,
think you were there in the cabinet, right?
When they passed that civil rights bill, Lyndon Johnson went up to Capitol Hill and he signed it up there, not at the White House, because he said if it hadn't been for Everett Dirksen, we'd have a bill. Because of Everett Dirksen, we have a law. And he said, I want to make sure he gets credit. And he said the other part, and he told his daughter this, he said the other part of it is some of the people that voted for this are going to get beat the next time, and I want them to know I appreciate that. I don't see that
Well, a lot of
today.
people who voted for, and the president understood for health care reform, lost their election, and that was a courageous vote, as under Bill Clinton, voting for a tax increase in '93 probably cost the Democrats 94. So this president's not been afraid to have his friends take tough votes as they did for
So
ACA.
what's
and
this
lose an election.
mean, though? What you're saying, what everyone is saying, you've got an unruly and a very difficult political opposition. The job of the president is to figure out how to manage that. And look, you know John Boehner, the speaker, he's a traditional conservative. Anyone who's dealt with him knows you can make deals with
Yeah,
him.
but Bob,
Yes,
things
you
have
can.
gotten better, obviously. It looks like they may be getting better. But quite frankly, there is a battle going on with the Republican Party, within the Republican Party, that we cannot dismiss. And that has driven, since control was changed in the House to the Republicans'
And as
intent.
you well
If
know-
you don't think
Fabulous,
that's...
then exploit it. Don't say, oh no, they're tearing each other apart. Say, fabulous,
No.
they're tearing each
John
other
Boehner's
apart.
been the
I'm
one
going to
I
make
think who's
you
been torn
extreme. I'm
apart.
going to bring you
I
in.
think
But you know, I mean, I hate to keep going back to this. This is not a tutorial on LBJ, but there was a battle going on between Northern and Southern
Bob, that was
Democrats.
50
Oh, it was
years
terrible.
ago. Are you saying today a president could pull
Well,
off
how long
the
was
sort of things that
Abraham
Lyndon
Lincoln?
Johnson...
That was even before that. But
Yeah,
there
but
was
you
battle
saw the
going
great
on
movie
there.
on Lincoln. If a president did what he had done, Lincoln, to pass that, I would assume, as I said, impeachment probably be the least of his concerns.
The president did
my
worse. The
goodness.
president said everyone can keep their health insurance.
Yeah, and he
and
gave
then they
everyone-
bought off
Yeah,
different
he
senators.
he
He bought off Ben Nelson in
You don't
Nebraska.
even have earmarks
Yeah.
anymore, much less
Yeah.
buying off the way they may
Oh,
have bought
poor
everyone
President
off.
Obama. He doesn't
No,
have
I'm not saying
earmarks
that.
anymore.
No,
you know?
Bill, all I'm saying is to go back to the Lyndon Johnson analogy, all due respect to Lyndon Johnson and the type of Congress and the system we had there then, and say you could do, and that's the model, is just not reality.
I'm not, but
It's not the
Obama's
model to say,
capable
"Look,
of doing
here's
this.
something I
No,
can
how
do
he
for
got
you
those votes.
If you
Yeah,
will do this for me.
But Bob, the things he probably did to get those votes that have never probably been reported on are the things that got it passed. Okay, and today you can't do those things. It's not just giving a speech.
This
as
from-
Peggy
Without,
will write.
oh my
I mean,
God,
that's
Chicago
ridiculous.
without a
politician,
single
all right?
Republican vote. You
Come
need
on here.
Republicans in the drama. You need them co-owning this bill with you. You need
No
them
kidding.
moderating it.
Right.
Let
Look,
me-
can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm so sorry, Bob.
Of course.
Tell me, the president begins his brand new 6th year, has State of the Union on Tuesday night. You know him. You have been his chief of staff. What governing part of his job as the chief executive president of the United States does he love? Does he love this job? Lyndon Johnson loved it. I mean, does he love the doing of the presidency? Does he love the deal making?
I think the doing of the
Or
president and
you
deal
name
making.
it,
Now, there's a
yeah.
big difference. If you
All right.
Lyndon Johnson deal making, that's a little different. For what I know of this president, he absolutely loves the job. He loves the fact, and I think if you read in that long article you mentioned, Bob, that he understands that whether it's 4 years or 8 years, you're part of history, and the things he's trying to do, whether it's healthcare, whether it's reform of the banking system as was done, Dodd-Frank, and other things going forward, that there's he does love the job. He loves the fact that he is able to help people, and I think the thought that he doesn't love the job is just from people who have
Well,
no
a lot of
anything
people,
about it.
a lot of people
say
say
he
that.
doesn't like
Yes.
the job. But let me just shift to something else. The New York Times Magazine today put out a cover that I think we'll be seeing this for a long time. It is called Planet Hillary. I must say, my first reaction, I thought it was Chris Christie when I saw, and then I thought, well, maybe it's the man on the moon or something. But I mean, what about this article?
Well, my first thought was it was an unfortunate rendering of an attractive person. But I guess my second thought is, you know, Mrs. Clinton, I'm not sure if she's going to run. She may not be sure, or maybe everybody understands she's going to run. But man, she takes up all the oxygen. and keeps other potential Democratic presidential contenders from getting into the story. And if she does not run, she's going to spend between now and when she announces she won't run being the star and being the assumed Democrat. I wonder what that's going to do for the Democratic Party. I would worry about it a little bit.
What about Bill
I think the
Kristol?
piece is unfair to Secretary Clinton, honestly. Don't intend to vote for her in 2016, but it's not about her. It's as if there's this huge psychodrama going on, and she has enemies and frenemies and friends and supporters and Bill. You know, she has been a senator from New York for 8 years and Secretary of State for 4 years. Shouldn't the New York Times be reporting on her record, the pluses and minuses, not this kind of childish psychoanalysis?
I couldn't agree more. And sucking all the oxygen out of this and that piece, it's about the consultants and the aides, and even in one version of that in the magazine, in her orbit they have Dick Morris. Now, Dick Morris worked for her husband and is now an enemy of the Clintons. Would that be, I mean, hardly in the orbit. And you've got all of this stuff about the consultants and the teams coming in. They're going to micro-target, they're going to macro-target. They're talking about fundraising portals. And the average Democratic voter, I think, says, wait a minute, is this a railroad?
Yeah.
Is there a choice for me?
We have to end there. I'm sorry. We'll continue this in the green room, but on the air here, we'll be back in 1 minute to talk about the Olympics.